"You're going to have sex with me," the mountain black woman declared, standing unwavering before the giant cowboy as dust swirled between them in the stunned town square. The gathered crowd snickered at her boldness, this uppity healer who dared speak above her station. They whispered she'd lost her mind, that rejection would finally teach her proper place. Her assumed fate, humiliation and exile from decent society. But the towering drifter didn't laugh. His weathered face studied her with unexpected curiosity, recognizing something the others missed, desperation masquerading as defiance. He'd been hired to restore order, yet this woman's eyes held secrets that could unravel everything. Unknown to all, 30 days remained before she'd lose everything her father died protecting, and one man's answer would determine whether justice or corruption claimed the richest land in 3 territories. Would he become her salvation or her destruction? 3 weeks earlier, Bianca Thorne knelt beside her herb garden as the morning sun painted the mountain peaks gold. The scent of wild sage filled the air. She crushed lavender between her fingers, preparing remedies that kept her alive in a world determined to forget her existence. The letter had arrived yesterday. 30 days to marry or lose everything. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, teaching her to read the complex legal documents that white men assumed she couldn't understand. Property law, inheritance rights, the weapons of paper and ink that could destroy lives faster than any bullet. 1,200 acres of mineral-rich land. Silver deposits her father had discovered but kept secret. Enough wealth to buy respect, or at least silence the whispers that followed her through Dustwater Creek's dusty streets. She folded the territorial court notice and placed it in her leather satchel. The walk to town stretched before her like a gauntlet. Every step would be measured, every glance catalogued by eyes that saw her as entertainment rather than human. The first whispers started at Miller's General Store. Women gathered around barrels of flour and sugar, their voices carrying just loud enough for her to hear. 30 days to find a husband. What man would want that? Should have known her place years ago. Bianca selected her supplies with steady hands. Salt, coffee beans, bandages for the healing work that kept coins in her pocket. The shopkeeper's wife counted her money twice, as if expecting trickery from fingers that had pulled countless people back from death's edge. Mayor Cornelius Whitmore emerged from the barber shop as she loaded her horse. His smile never reached his eyes. He approached with the measured steps of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Thorne, heard about your unfortunate situation." She secured the rope around her supplies. "Nothing unfortunate about inheriting what belongs to me. Course not. Just seems a shame, all that land going to waste without proper management." His fingers drummed against his vest. "Town's got plans for development, progress, you understand." Bianca mounted her horse. "My father's will was quite specific about his intentions. Wills can be complicated things, especially when circumstances change." Whitmore's voice carried the weight of unspoken threats. "Good day, Miss Thorne." The ride back up the mountain gave her time to think. 3 potential suitors had already withdrawn their interest. Marcus Webb, the blacksmith, had suddenly decided to move his business to the next county. James Crawford, the widowed rancher, claimed urgent family matters required his immediate attention elsewhere. Even old Theodore Mullins, desperate enough for any wife at 72, had mysteriously changed his mind overnight. Someone was orchestrating her isolation. Someone with enough influence to make grown men disappear rather than face social consequences. Someone who wanted her father's land badly enough to ensure she failed. Back in her cabin, Bianca spread maps across her kitchen table, property boundaries marked in her father's careful handwriting, survey notes detailing mineral deposits that could fund a small army, legal documents establishing ownership beyond any reasonable challenge. Unless she remained unmarried. The inheritance law was clear. Unmarried women over 21 could inherit property, but only if wed within 30 days of receiving territorial notification. An old law designed to ensure land stayed in male hands. a trap her father had tried to circumvent through careful legal maneuvering. She studied the faces in her memory, every eligible man in 3 counties, every possible candidate who might brave social pressure for monetary gain. The list grew shorter with each name she crossed off. Thunder rumbled across the valley as storm clouds gathered over the peaks. Bianca closed her eyes and summoned her father's voice once more. He taught her to think strategically, to see solutions others missed. The law required marriage, not love. Business arrangements existed in every corner of frontier life. She needed someone with enough reputation to resist local pressure and enough independence to honor a contract. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A rider had arrived in Dustwater Creek, a man with a reputation for solving impossible problems, someone hired by Mayor Whitmore himself to restore order to situations that had grown beyond local control. Zeke Beckett. She'd heard the name whispered in saloons and trading posts across the territory. A man who settled disputes through negotiation rather than violence. Someone who stood outside the local power structure that sought to crush her. Irony tasted bitter on her tongue. The mayor had brought in his solution to her problem. Now she would turn that solution to her advantage. Bianca checked her reflection in the cracked mirror above her wash basin. Her father's eyes stared back, filled with the same determination that had built an empire from nothing. She smoothed her dress and braided her hair with hands that had never trembled, not even when delivering breech babies or setting broken bones. The ride to town felt different this time. Purpose replaced desperation. Strategy overcame emotion. She would shock them all with her boldness, but shock often revealed truth faster than polite conversation. Dustwater Creek's main street buzzed with morning activity. Shopkeepers swept their porches. Children chased chickens between wagon wheels. Women hung laundry on lines stretched between buildings. She spotted him immediately. Zeke Beckett stood a full head taller than any man present, his presence commanding attention without effort. He examined his horse's shoes outside the livery stable, unaware that his entire future was about to change. Bianca dismounted and walked toward him with measured steps. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. The morning air grew thick with anticipation. She stopped 3 feet away and looked up into eyes that held more curiosity than judgment. Her voice carried across the suddenly silent street with perfect clarity. "You're going to have sex with me." If you are enjoying this story of how one bold declaration will change 2 lives forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next 15 minutes in Dustwater Creek will completely change everything these 2 people thought they knew about marriage, justice, and survival. The gasps rippled through the crowd like stones thrown into still water. Women clutched their shawls tighter. Men shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. Children pressed closer to their mothers, sensing scandal in the charged air. Zeke Beckett straightened slowly, his weathered hand stilled on the horse's hoof. Gray eyes studied Bianca's face with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to read people's true intentions beneath their words. "Ma'am, I believe we should discuss this privately." The crowd murmured disappointment. They'd gathered expecting entertainment, not reasonable discourse. Bianca nodded once and gestured toward the small chapel at the end of the street, neutral ground where even the boldest gossips wouldn't dare eavesdrop. Inside the whitewashed sanctuary, sunlight filtered through simple glass windows. Dust motes danced in golden beams that fell across worn wooden pews. The space felt sacred enough to demand honesty. Bianca faced him directly. "I need a husband. You need money. This can benefit us both." Zeke removed his hat and ran fingers through dark hair streaked with premature silver. Most women lead up to proposals different. Most women aren't facing legal theft disguised as inheritance law. She pulled the territorial notice from her satchel. 30 days to marry or lose 1,200 acres of mineral-rich land. His eyebrows rose as he read the document. Silver deposits. Enough to make both of us wealthy beyond anything this town has ever seen. Bianca traced patterns on the pew's wooden surface. My father spent 20 years accumulating that property. He taught me to read contracts, understand mining rights, navigate territorial law, knowledge most people assume I don't possess. Zeke folded the notice carefully. Why me? Because you're not from here. You don't owe favors to men who want my failure. You have reputation enough to resist local pressure. She met his gaze without flinching. And because Mayor Whitmore hired you to restore order, he brought you here to solve his problems. I'm simply offering you a different problem to solve. The chapel door creaked open. Reverend Matthews peered inside, his thin face pinched with curiosity. Everything appropriate in here. Just discussing business, Reverend. Zeke's voice carried enough authority to send the preacher scurrying back outside. Bianca continued. This would be a legal arrangement only. Marriage in name to satisfy the court. You'd receive 25% of all mining proceeds for 5 years, more money than you'd see in a lifetime of odd jobs. And after 5 years, the marriage dissolves if you choose. The land remains mine. You keep your percentage and leave wealthy. She paused. Or we renegotiate terms as equal partners. Zeke walked to the window overlooking Main Street. Mayor Whitmore stood outside the bank, gesturing animatedly to a group of prominent citizens. Their eyes kept drifting toward the chapel. Man's already planning your downfall. He's been planning it since my father died 6 months ago. Bianca joined him at the window. Josiah Thorne was too smart, too successful for their comfort. They tolerated him because he guided hunting parties and trading expeditions, made them money, but they never intended for his daughter to inherit real power. A memory surfaced from Zeke's past. His own father, a railroad worker whose injury had cost him everything when the company refused compensation. Legal documents that might as well have been written in foreign languages. The helplessness of watching injustice unfold while possessing no tools to fight back. Your father teach you all this legal knowledge. Started when I was 12. Bianca's voice softened with remembered affection. He'd spread contracts across our kitchen table every evening, made me read every clause, explain every condition, said the law was a weapon that cut both ways, but only if you understood how to wield it. Smart man. Smart enough to hide the true value of his holdings until after his death. Smart enough to structure the inheritance to give me fighting chance. Her jaw tightened. Not smart enough to avoid whatever killed him. Zeke turned from the window. You think his death wasn't natural. Healthy man doesn't collapse from sudden illness without warning. Not when he possessed something others wanted badly enough to steal. She folded her hands. But proving suspicions requires time I don't have. Right now, I need to secure the inheritance before I can investigate what happened to the man who left it to me. The chapel door opened again. This time Mayor Whitmore himself entered, flanked by 2 associates. His smile stretched too wide, revealing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. Miss Thorne, Mr. Beckett, trust you're having a productive conversation. Private conversation, Zeke corrected. Course. Just wanted to remind our guest about tonight's town meeting. Important matters to discuss regarding local stability. Whitmore's eyes never left Bianca. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings about community standards. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Bianca felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being hunted, but this time was different. This time she had options. We'll be there, she said firmly. Whitmore's smile faltered. We. Mr. Beckett and I have business arrangements to finalize. Naturally, he'll want to understand local concerns that might affect his investments. The word investments hit like a physical blow. Whitmore's face flushed red above his collar. He'd expected her to face this battle alone, defenseless against coordinated opposition. The possibility that she might find allies hadn't entered his calculations. Good day, gentlemen. Zeke's dismissal carried finality that brooked no argument. After they left, silence settled over the chapel. Zeke studied Bianca with new respect. She just declared war against the most powerful man in 3 counties without raising her voice or making empty threats. You realize what you just did? I made our partnership public before you agreed to it. She smiled for the first time since entering the chapel. Sometimes presumption is the best negotiation strategy. Presumption assumes I'm saying yes. Are you? Zeke looked through the window at the town beyond. People he'd been hired to serve, unaware their leader was orchestrating theft under color of law. A woman facing impossible odds with nothing but intelligence and determination as weapons. His father's voice echoed across the years. Some fights are worth taking, son, even when you can't see clear path to winning. Yes, but we do this right. Legal ceremony, proper witnesses, documentation that can't be challenged in any court. He extended his hand. Partners. Bianca shook it firmly. Partners. Outside, storm clouds continued gathering over the mountain peaks. But for the first time in months, Bianca Thorne felt lightning crackling in her favor rather than against her. The real battle was just beginning. The town meeting that evening crackled with tension thick as summer lightning. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows across faces twisted by curiosity and malice. Mayor Whitmore commanded the front of Miller's General Store, transformed into a makeshift courthouse for the occasion. Bianca entered with Zeke beside her. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children were quickly ushered outside despite their protests. Women gathered in tight clusters, whispering behind gloved hands. Friends, neighbors. Whitmore's voice boomed across the crowded space. We face challenges to our community values, situations that threaten the natural order we've worked so hard to establish. Eyes turned toward Bianca like compass needles finding magnetic north. She stood perfectly still, hands folded, expression serene. Years of enduring public scrutiny had taught her the power of dignified silence. Now, I understand Miss Thorne here has made certain proposals to our visiting mediator. Whitmore's smile could have cut glass. Proposals that some might find concerning given their unconventional nature. A voice from the back called out. What kind of proposals? The kind that proper ladies don't make to respectable men. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The kind that suggests desperation has overcome good sense. Zeke stepped forward. Mayor Whitmore, perhaps you'd prefer discussing business matters privately rather than entertaining gossip. This is community business, Mr. Beckett. When outsiders attempt to manipulate local situations for personal gain, we all suffer consequences. The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Bianca felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. But something had changed since this morning. She no longer faced this alone. A commotion near the door interrupted Whitmore's speech. Martha Sullivan stumbled inside, clutching her 8-year-old son Tommy against her chest. The boy's face burned with fever, his small body shaking with chills that rattled his teeth. Please. Martha's voice broke with desperation. Doctor's out of town. Tommy's burning up. I don't know what else to do. The crowd parted reluctantly. Fever was always dangerous, especially in children. Too many families had lost little ones to illnesses that struck without warning. Bianca moved without hesitation. She knelt beside Martha, placing gentle hands on Tommy's forehead. His skin felt like heated metal beneath her palms. How long has he been like this? Started this morning. Got worse through the day. Martha's tears left streaks through dust on her cheeks. Please, Miss Thorne, I know folks say things about your healing, but you're the only one who might help. Whispers buzzed through the assembled crowd. Some called her healing witchcraft. Others dismissed it as lucky guesses combined with folk remedies. But desperate mothers cared little for gossip when their children suffered. Bianca examined Tommy with practiced efficiency. Checked his pulse, listened to his breathing, felt for swollen glands. The symptoms painted a clear picture. Scarlet fever in its early stages. Dangerous but treatable if caught quickly. Martha, I need you to trust me completely. No questions, no hesitation. Can you do that? The woman nodded frantically. Bianca turned to address the crowd. I need clean water, honey, willow bark, and elderberry extract. Someone fetch them immediately. Now wait just a minute. Whitmore's voice cut through the activity. We can't have unqualified persons practicing medicine on children. Too much risk of making things worse. The risk is waiting for qualified help that won't arrive in time. Bianca's response carried quiet authority born from years of successful healing. This boy needs treatment now. Several townspeople hesitated, caught between Whitmore's implied command and a mother's desperate plea. The internal conflict played across their faces like shadow and light. Zeke broke the stalemate. I'll get the supplies. His action galvanized others. Women began moving toward their homes to gather requested materials. Men stepped aside to clear paths. Even those who disapproved found themselves swept along by collective urgency. Within minutes, Bianca had everything she needed. She worked with steady hands, preparing remedies her father had taught her years ago. Knowledge passed down through generations of healers who understood plants and bodies in ways that formal medicine often missed. This will taste terrible, but you need to drink all of it. She held a cup to Tommy's lips. The boy grimaced but swallowed obediently. Next came a poultice for his chest. Herbs combined with honey created a paste that would draw out infection. Bianca applied it with gentle circular motions while humming softly under her breath. The crowd watched in fascination. Her movements possessed the fluid grace of someone completely confident in their abilities. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just skilled hands guided by extensive knowledge. Within 30 minutes, Tommy's breathing began to ease. His fever broke, releasing the dangerous heat that had threatened his young life. Color returned to cheeks that had been pale as winter snow. Martha sobbed with relief. Thank you so much. The transformation in the room was palpable. People who had entered viewing Bianca as a problem now saw her as someone who had just saved a child's life. The same hands they dismissed as unsuitable for land ownership had just accomplished what their absent doctor might have failed to achieve. Whitmore's face darkened as he recognized the shift in public opinion. His carefully orchestrated campaign to isolate Bianca was crumbling before his eyes. Very impressive, he said through gritted teeth. But healing tricks don't qualify someone for property ownership responsibilities. They qualify her for respect. Zeke's voice carried across the silent room, which is more than some folks here have earned. The challenge was unmistakable. Zeke Beckett, hired gun brought in to solve Whitmore's problems, had publicly chosen sides. The balance of power in Dustwater Creek had just shifted dramatically. Mr. Beckett, perhaps you've forgotten why you're here. I remember exactly why I'm here, to restore proper order. Zeke's gray eyes never wavered. Sometimes that means protecting good people from those who'd harm them. Bianca rose gracefully, her work finished. Tommy Sullivan sat up under his own power, fever broken, breathing clear, living proof of abilities that transcended social prejudices. Miss Thorne and I will be married tomorrow morning, Zeke announced. Anyone who wishes to attend a proper Christian ceremony is welcome. The words hit like thunder in the stunned silence. What had begun as an evening of public humiliation had become a declaration of alliance that would reshape everything. Whitmore's carefully laid plans lay in ruins around him, but his expression promised this was far from over. Dawn broke gray and cold over Dustwater Creek as Bianca prepared for her wedding day. She stood before the cracked mirror in her cabin, braiding wildflowers into her dark hair. The same hands that had saved Tommy Sullivan's life now trembled slightly as they fastened her mother's pearl earrings. This wasn't the wedding she dreamed of as a girl. No flowing white dress or church full of celebrating friends. Just a business arrangement that would either save her future or destroy what little peace she'd managed to build. The knock came at precisely 8 o'clock. Zeke stood on her porch wearing his cleanest shirt and a black jacket that had seen better days. His gray eyes held steady resolve mixed with something that might have been nervousness. Ready for this? Bianca nodded and gathered her father's Bible. The leather binding had worn smooth from years of evening readings by lamplight. Inside the front cover, his careful handwriting recorded family births, deaths, and marriages stretching back 3 generations. The ride to town felt different this morning. Fewer people on the streets. Windows that should have been busy with morning activity remained shuttered and dark. Word of the wedding had spread, and Dustwater Creek was choosing sides. Reverend Matthews waited outside the small church, his face pale and drawn. Dark circles under his eyes suggested a sleepless night wrestling with conscience and community pressure. "Miss Thorne, Mr. Beckett." His voice cracked slightly. "I've prepared the ceremony as requested." Inside the sanctuary, a handful of witnesses had gathered. Martha Sullivan sat in the front pew with Tommy, whose clear eyes and healthy color testified to Bianca's healing skills. Several other families she'd helped over the years filled scattered seats. Notably absent were the town's prominent citizens. Mayor Whitmore had made his displeasure clear, and most business owners had fallen in line behind his unspoken boycott. The ceremony began with halting words from a nervous preacher. Traditional vows took on new meaning when spoken as part of a calculated strategy rather than declarations of love. Yet something in the ancient words touched both bride and groom unexpectedly. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, a strange silence settled over the small gathering. They had just witnessed something unprecedented in their community's history, a marriage that defied every social convention while remaining perfectly legal. The first test came immediately. At Miller's General Store, the proprietor's wife turned her back when the newlyweds entered together. Other customers suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. "We're closed for inventory," Mrs. Miller announced loudly. Zeke studied the fully stocked shelves and busy activity visible through the window. "Looks pretty open to me. Private business has rights to refuse service." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. This was how it would be. Economic warfare designed to starve them into submission or force them to leave town entirely. But Martha Sullivan appeared in the doorway with a basket of fresh bread and preserves. "Congratulations on your marriage. Tommy wanted you to have this." Other families began emerging from their homes. People Bianca had helped during medical emergencies. Farmers whose livestock she'd treated. Children whose fevers she'd broken when the doctor was unavailable. They brought gifts. Simple offerings that meant more than gold. Fresh eggs. Hand-sewn quilts. Jarred vegetables. A community within a community, united by gratitude rather than prejudice. The newlyweds rode up to Bianca's mountain cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. Zeke had agreed to sleep in the barn until they could add a proper room to the modest structure. Maintaining appearances mattered, even in a marriage of convenience. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table examining property maps by lamplight. The documents revealed the true scope of Josiah Thorne's accumulated wealth. Mineral rights stretched across 3 counties, water rights that controlled access to major streams, timber holdings that could supply railroad construction for decades. Your father was building an empire. He was building security for his daughter in a world that didn't want her to have any. Bianca traced boundary lines with her finger. Every acre purchased legally, every contract negotiated fairly, everything documented beyond challenge. Zeke studied the mining survey reports. "These silver deposits are substantial. We're talking about generational wealth, which explains why certain people want me to fail." She pulled out a folder of correspondence. 3 different mining companies have made inquiries about the land in the past 6 months. All refused when they learned who owned it. But they deal with the town if the property reverted to municipal control. "Exactly. Mayor Whitmore stands to profit significantly from my failure." A sound outside made them both freeze. Hoofbeats approaching fast in the darkness. Zeke moved to the window while Bianca extinguished the lamp. 6 riders surrounded the cabin. Their faces remained hidden in shadow, but their intentions seemed clear. Intimidation through show of force. "Bianca Thorne," a voice called out. "Time to discuss your future arrangements." She recognized the speaker, Jake Morrison, Whitmore's unofficial enforcer, a man who solved problems through violence when legal methods proved insufficient. Mrs. Beckett, she corrected firmly, and my future arrangements are none of your concern. Marriage don't change facts. You still don't belong here. Zeke appeared in the doorway, rifle held casually but ready. 6 men riding armed onto private property after dark. That's trespassing at minimum, conspiracy at worst. The riders shifted nervously. They'd expected to find a frightened woman alone. Instead, they faced a seasoned gunfighter with legal authority and witnesses nearby who could testify about their actions. "This ain't over," Morrison growled. "No, it's not." Zeke's voice carried quiet menace. "But next time you want conversation, try calling during daylight hours like civilized people." The riders melted back into darkness, but their message was clear. Legal marriage had secured the inheritance, but holding onto it would require constant vigilance. Back inside, Bianca relit the lamp with steady hands. "Thank you for standing with me. We're partners now. Partners protect each other." Something had shifted between them during the confrontation. The marriage might have started as business arrangement, but facing danger together had created bonds that transcended mere contracts. Over the following days, the pattern became clear. Economic pressure during daylight hours, intimidation after dark, a coordinated campaign designed to make their lives unbearable. But something unexpected began happening. Other marginalized families started reaching out. Mexican ranchers who faced similar discrimination. Native American traders excluded from normal commerce. Poor white farmers dismissed by the established power structure. An alliance was forming. People who had nothing in common except shared experience of being pushed aside by those who controlled the town's resources. Bianca's cabin became an unofficial meeting place. Her kitchen table hosted discussions about mutual protection and economic cooperation. Plans took shape for alternative trading arrangements that bypassed hostile businesses. She watched Zeke during these gatherings, saw how he listened carefully to every voice, regardless of the speaker's background or social status. His reputation for fair dealing had preceded him, and now that reputation was working in their favor. Late one evening, as the last visitors departed, she found herself studying her husband's profile in the lamplight. The strong jaw that suggested determination. The careful eyes that missed nothing important. The gentle hands that could wield weapons but chose words instead. "Regrets?" she asked quietly. He considered the question seriously. "About the marriage? No. About the complications it's brought? Also no." He met her gaze directly. "You? None worth mentioning." Outside, wind whispered through pine branches like secrets being shared. Inside, 2 people who had married for practical reasons discovered that respect could grow into something deeper given time and shared purpose. The real battle for Dustwater Creek's future was just beginning. 2 weeks into their marriage, the trap finally sprung. Bianca was tending her herb garden when she spotted the dust cloud rising from the valley road. A formal carriage approached, flanked by armed riders wearing territorial badges. Judge Aldrich Cromwell had arrived 3 days early. Zeke emerged from the barn where he'd been repairing harnesses. His weathered face tightened as he recognized the significance of the approaching entourage. Judges didn't travel with armed escorts unless they expected trouble. "They're moving faster than anticipated." Bianca wiped soil from her hands and gathered her legal documents. "Then we adjust our timeline accordingly." The carriage stopped in front of Whitmore's house rather than the courthouse. Strategy meetings would happen in private before any public proceedings began. Time was running short to complete their investigation. That evening, Rosa Hernandez knocked softly at their cabin door. The elderly Mexican woman had lost her husband to a suspicious accident 2 years prior. Her weathered hands shook as she spoke. "My Eduardo, he saw things before he died. Men coming to Senor Thorne's cabin at night, always the same man, always carrying small bottles." Bianca exchanged glances with Zeke. This was the testimony they'd been seeking, direct witness to suspicious activity around her father's death. "Rosa, would you be willing to tell this to a judge?" The old woman's eyes filled with fear. They killed my Eduardo when he asked too many questions. What makes you think they won't kill me? Because this time you won't be alone. Zeke's voice carried quiet authority. And because staying silent hasn't kept you safe so far. Over the next day, more witnesses emerged from the shadows. People who had noticed strange coincidences but lacked the courage to speak individually. A pattern emerged of systematic poisoning disguised as natural illness. Dr. Blackwood had been feeding mercury compound to Josiah Thorne under the pretense of treating digestive ailments. Small doses over months, causing gradual mental deterioration that would make him appear incompetent to manage his affairs. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Drive Thorne insane, have him declared unfit, seize the property through legal guardianship. Bianca's inheritance had disrupted the timeline, forcing them to let him die and pursue alternative strategies. But now Judge Cromwell was conducting private hearings, and their window for justice was closing rapidly. The summons arrived at dawn. Official territorial court documents demanding their immediate appearance to answer charges of marriage fraud. The hearing would take place in 2 hours, barely enough time to gather witnesses and evidence. Bianca dressed carefully in her finest clothes. Her father's words echoed in her memory about the importance of appearance in legal proceedings. Dignity and preparation were weapons that cut deeper than any blade. The courthouse overflowed with spectators. Word had spread throughout 3 counties about the marriage challenge. Faces pressed against windows. People stood on chairs to see over the crowd. This was entertainment and justice rolled into one explosive package. Judge Cromwell commanded attention through sheer presence. A massive man with piercing blue eyes and a voice that could silence thunder. His reputation for fairness was matched only by his intolerance for lies and manipulation. We're here to examine the legitimacy of a marriage between Bianca Thorne and Ezekiel Beckett. Serious allegations have been made regarding the motivations and circumstances surrounding this union. Mayor Whitmore rose from his seat. Your Honor, the town has concerns about fraudulent arrangements designed to circumvent inheritance law. And what evidence supports these concerns? Witness testimony regarding the unconventional nature of the proposal, the rushed ceremony, the clear financial motivations involved. Cromwell turned his attention to the defendants. Mrs. Beckett, how do you respond to these allegations? Bianca stood with perfect composure. Your Honor, I respond by presenting evidence of murder, fraud, and conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of this community's leadership. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. This wasn't the defensive response anyone had expected. Instead of justifying her marriage, she was launching a counterattack. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Beckett. Supported by serious evidence, Your Honor. She gestured to Rosa Hernandez and 3 other witnesses. These people will testify to a systematic poisoning campaign designed to steal my inheritance through manufactured incompetence. Whitmore jumped to his feet. This is preposterous. Desperate attempts to deflect attention from obvious fraud. Then you won't mind if we examine the evidence thoroughly. Judge Cromwell's tone suggested he was enjoying this unexpected development. Rosa Hernandez testified first. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. She described Eduardo's reports about mysterious nighttime visits to Josiah Thorne's cabin. Always the same man carrying medical supplies, always leaving before dawn. Dr. Blackwood shifted nervously in his seat as the testimony continued. Other witnesses corroborated the pattern. A campaign of slow poisoning disguised as medical treatment. Bianca presented her father's preserved hair samples along with chemical analysis reports she'd commissioned from the territorial capital. Mercury levels far exceeding any therapeutic dosage. Clear evidence of systematic poisoning. Your Honor, she continued, the marriage fraud allegations are themselves fraudulent. A desperate attempt to discredit testimony that exposes murder for profit. Judge Cromwell studied the chemical reports with obvious interest. Dr. Blackwood, You're accused of administering toxic doses of mercury to Josiah Thorne. How do you respond? The doctor's face had gone pale as parchment. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Mercury is a standard treatment for digestive ailments. Any competent physician would prescribe similar dosages, in quantities that would kill a horse. Bianca's voice cut through his explanation like a surgical blade. My analysis shows mercury concentrations 30 times higher than any legitimate medical application. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Cromwell banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. The careful web of conspiracy was unraveling thread by thread. Whitmore made one final desperate gambit. Your Honor, even if these wild accusations were true, they don't address the fundamental question of marriage legitimacy. Financial arrangements don't constitute grounds for legitimate matrimony. Actually, they do. Zeke spoke for the first time since the hearing began. Marriage contracts have been legal arrangements throughout human history. Love is preferred but not required by law. He stood and moved to Bianca's side. But for the record, Your Honor, whatever this marriage began as, it's become something much deeper. I'm proud to call this remarkable woman my wife. The words rang with sincerity that couldn't be manufactured. Judge Cromwell studied both faces carefully, reading the subtle signs that indicated genuine affection had grown between them. The court finds the marriage legitimate and binding. His gavel fell with finality. Furthermore, I'm ordering immediate investigation into the death of Josiah Thorne and the conduct of certain town officials. Whitmore's face crumpled as his carefully constructed empire began collapsing around him. Dr. Blackwood bolted for the door but found his path blocked by territorial marshals. Justice had arrived in Dustwater Creek, carried on the wings of evidence and courage. But the celebration would have to wait. Outside, angry voices were calling for mob action against the people who had dared challenge the established order. The courthouse erupted in chaos as Judge Cromwell's verdict echoed through the packed room. Territorial marshals moved swiftly to arrest Mayor Whitmore and Dr. Blackwood. Handcuffs clicked into place as the architects of murder and fraud were led away in disgrace. But outside, angry shouts filled the air. A crowd had gathered, their faces twisted with rage at seeing their established order overturned. Some clutched farming tools. Others carried rocks picked up from the street. The mob mentality that had simmered beneath polite society was finally boiling over. Jake Morrison stood on the courthouse steps, his voice carrying over the tumult. They've made fools of us all, used our own laws against us. Bianca and Zeke remained inside as Judge Cromwell finished documenting the proceedings. Through the windows, they could see the crowd growing larger and more agitated. Fear and hatred were powerful forces when channeled through collective action. Back exit leads to the alley, Judge Cromwell advised quietly. My marshals will escort you to safety. Running now means running forever. Bianca gathered her legal documents with steady hands. This ends today, one way or another. Zeke studied her face, recognizing the same determined expression she'd worn when first approaching him in the town square. Then we face it together. They walked through the courthouse's front doors side by side. The crowd fell silent as they emerged, hundreds of eyes fixed on the couple who had just shattered everything their community thought it understood about power and justice. Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. You think hiding behind badges and legal papers makes you safe. I think truth makes us safe. Bianca's voice carried clearly across the square. Truth about murder. Truth about theft. Truth about men who'd rather destroy than admit they were wrong. Martha Sullivan pushed through the crowd, carrying young Tommy in her arms. This woman saved my son's life when your precious mayor would have let him die. Other voices began joining hers. Families Bianca had helped. People who had witnessed her healing skills firsthand. The crowd began dividing into opposing camps as supporters found courage to speak. Rosa Hernandez stepped forward despite her advanced age. She gave my Eduardo justice when no one else would listen. She gave us all justice today. The Mexican and Native American families who had formed alliances with the Becketts moved to stand behind them. Poor white farmers who had been excluded from the town's prosperity joined the growing group. A coalition of the dismissed and forgotten was finally making itself visible. Judge Cromwell appeared in the courthouse doorway, flanked by his marshals. His presence reminded everyone that territorial law now protected the very people they'd sought to destroy. "Disperse peacefully," he commanded. "Justice has been served according to law. Anyone who disturbs the peace will face federal charges." Morrison's group began backing down as they realized the changed circumstances. Without Whitmore's protection and financing, they were just angry individuals facing serious legal consequences for their actions. But the confrontation had served its purpose. Everyone in Dustwater Creek now understood that fundamental change had arrived. The old power structure was crumbling, and a new one was rising to take its place. Over the following weeks, the transformation accelerated. Dr. Blackwood's confession revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. 3 other property owners had been poisoned or driven insane to facilitate land seizures. The territorial government launched investigations that would continue for months. Bianca and Zeke began developing their inherited property with careful attention to community benefit. The silver mines provided employment for dozens of families, regardless of their ethnic background. Fair wages and safe working conditions attracted skilled miners from across the territory. The school they funded welcomed children of all races and backgrounds. Native American youngsters learned alongside Mexican and white students, sharing knowledge and breaking down barriers that had seemed permanent just months earlier. The medical clinic Bianca established became renowned throughout the region. Her combination of traditional healing knowledge and modern medical techniques saved lives that conventional doctors had given up on. Patients traveled hundreds of miles seeking treatment from the woman who had once been dismissed as unsuitable for land ownership. Martha Sullivan became the school's first teacher. Her gratitude for Tommy's healing transformed into dedication to education. Rosa Hernandez shared her knowledge of traditional remedies, bridging cultural gaps through practical cooperation. Judge Cromwell's final report praised the Beckett's community development efforts as a model for territorial expansion. Their approach proved that prosperity could be shared rather than hoarded, that diversity strengthened rather than weakened frontier communities. On a crisp autumn morning 1 year later, Bianca stood on the porch of their expanded home. The cabin had grown into a comfortable house surrounded by gardens and outbuildings. Children's laughter echoed from the schoolyard below. Smoke rose from the clinic's chimney, where patients were being treated with dignity and skill. Zeke emerged from the barn, his face brightened by genuine happiness. The marriage that had begun as desperate strategy had evolved into deep partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Love had grown gradually, rooted in admiration and nurtured by common goals. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing her question from their early days together. "Only that my father didn't live to see this." She gestured toward the thriving community spread across the valley below. "He would have been proud of what we've built. He would have been proud of who you became." Their first child was due in the spring, a new generation that would grow up in a world where justice was possible, where courage could triumph over prejudice, where 2 people willing to stand together could change everything. The mountain peaks caught the morning sunlight, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Down in the valley, Dustwater Creek had become something none of them had imagined possible. A place where dignity mattered more than color, where intelligence was valued regardless of gender, where community meant everyone who contributed to the common good. Bianca placed her hand over her growing belly and smiled. The future they were building would be worthy of the struggles that had created it. Truth had indeed set them free, but more than that, it had shown them how to build something beautiful from the ashes of injustice. The story that had begun with a shocking proposition in a dusty town square had become something much larger, a testament to the power of strategic thinking, moral courage, and the revolutionary idea that love could grow anywhere justice took root.